Okay, let's get started, everyone. Welcome to our Global Business Leadership Forum. Today, we're going to be talking about leading through uncertainty, and it's a conversation with leadership development coach Gina Mollicone-Long. And Gina and I were on a discussion a couple of times over the last 2 weeks, and we began to talk about leadership in peacetime and leadership in what we call wartime circumstances. So that's a little bit of the analogy in the backdrop. Gina, welcome and thanks for joining us today.
Oh, thanks for having me, Keith. I'm really excited to be here. And I loved that conversation that we had, and that metaphor really turned into a powerful conversation. So I'm looking forward to sharing that with everybody today.
Okay, let's keep going here. I'm going to advance. So a little bit about Gina real quick, audience. She is author of 2 books, which you see in front of you, Think or Swim and The Secret of Successful Failing. She's also the founder of Greatness U. And in a moment, Gina, I'd like you to talk a little bit about Greatness U before we get started. And Gina is also one of the worldwide experts in neuro-linguistic programming. So Gina, tell us a little bit about Greatness U to get started, then we'll get right into the content.
Absolutely, Keith. So Greatness U is basically the vehicle that it's our learning, it's our university, if you will. That's where the Greatness U, we got all this swag made up that was university-esque. I've spent my life under the umbrella of revealing greatness. That is who I am, and it's what I'm about. My methods tend to be mechanistic because I have an engineering background on one hand, and I've been studying the mind for about 3 decades now. So what I've done is brought the two together, and I approach the mind in a way that is very linear, which makes it very amenable to business. And then Greatness U is the training institute by which we either train individuals themselves, companies, or coaches who work with companies. And so it's basically an educational institution.
Okay, and audience, we've gotten to know Gina through Gravitas, through some of our coaches going through her extensive NLP training. And so we recommend it to leaders worldwide. So with that, Gina, why don't you go ahead and drive your slides, and let's go ahead and get going.
All right, so I need to take over the screen here. So you.
Okay, let me work on stopping my share here.
Okay, all right, good. Now while I'm doing that and I've got everybody in attendance, I just want to get the energy level up. Webinars with me or even just this virtual environment is a little bit different than you might have been experiencing. So I want to start with a couple of questions. If you are able to raise your hands, please do if you use the hand function on Zoom, or you can type into the chat. Either one works. I really want to get you engaged. So let me ask you a few first questions. How many of you have found that you've had to radically change what you're doing in the last couple of months? Just by show of hands or by typing into the chat? Excellent, thank you. You can lower your hands. Now, how many of you would love if I showed you a mechanism for not only thriving right now, but actually being able to find an opportunity? So let's turn this baby on its head. Okay, we've got some people. So let me share my screen here with you as we get going. Now, my name is Gina Mollicone-Long. This is called How to Pivot and Find an Opportunity in a Crisis. Before we get going, I want to thank Keith and the work that he does, because this is not nothing. What Keith's putting out here is extremely valuable. I also want to thank those of you who have taken the time to show up. How many of you have something to do right now? Just raise your hand. You have something important to do. All right, I asked that question in sincerity because I want you to understand that my audiences are always business leaders, and I understand that your most important asset is your time. So the remaining time today that I'm involved in will be a return on the investment of that time. Thank you for joining us. Here are your 3 big takeaways from my little segment. Number 1, I'm going to start to teach you the process of change. Why that is important now is because everything is changing, and everything's changing in a very specific way. Number 2, I'm going to teach you the mindset that creates peak performance. And there are 3 components in the mindset that must be optimized prior to any performance. And then the third thing I'm going to teach you is how to take this knowledge and understanding and actually lead people. which is a little bit different than normal because not everybody that I talk to is a leader. So let's get into it. Now, Keith, you may not know this about me, but before I start, I have two important platforms. So the first thing I want to establish with your watchers, viewers, is who wants to get the most out of this program? Who wants to use this time to make a leap? Show of hands. Who wants the most? Okay, two guidelines. Number one, don't believe everything I say, right? This is really important when setting up a learning environment. This is not the capital T truth, and anybody that tells you that needs to be reminded that the world was true flat. So what I want to do is invite you to consider what I'm going to share. It will change the way you accept the information. And number two, we're going to make a learning mastermind. You may or may not have heard of the mastermind concept, but it says when two or more minds come together in pursuit of a common goal, including teaching, a third mind is created. What that does is it allows us to accelerate teaching. It allows you to understand this better and easier and with less effort. So with that being said, everybody who's in, I want you to give me a 10. So we're going to do our first interaction. The answer is a 10. And so what's going to happen is I'm going to perform at a level 10. You need to participate at a level 10, and we're going to create the learning mastermind of an 11 by doing that. So Keith, you're the only one we're going to be able to hear, so you need to be super loud. But listen, okay. But viewers, you need to do this at a level 10. So I want you to say or type the word 10 or the number 10 into the chat, or say it out loud. What level are we going to play for the next 25 minutes?
10.
10. Okay. Now, everybody give a high 10. How you do that in a virtual environment is you raise your hand, lower your hand, raise your hand, and lower your hand. That's a high 10. Go do a high 10 right here, right now. Okay. Great. Thank you for participating. Now, let's get into the process of change. So, I want you to understand this as a process, because right now change is accelerated. Right now change is enunciated, and quite frankly, there are some things about change that impact human behavior. Now, I developed this a long time ago because my training was as a process engineer. And what struck me as interesting was that everything in life changes except this process. So the process has sort of 5 components to it. The first part of any sort of process of change is no change, the comfort zone. No change is possible, no change is desired. And so this is a very important part, because many people live their lives in this place. Now, usually in a regular going about your life, something happens for you to want to change. So you start to notice somebody has something you don't know how to do, or they've started a business and maybe you want to start a business. And so you start to ask questions. So this is the desire for change. It is absolutely required for change. You only need 2 things for change. One is the desire to change, and it must be there before any change is possible. Once the desire is there, then we start to try to make the new behavior. We start to try to find a sequence. And so we try and we fail. So we try again and we fail. And let's say we try a 3rd time and we fail. Now, what's happening each time is it doesn't feel good when we fall down. And so we sometimes reach a threshold where we say, you know what, I don't want that anymore. I want to go back to the way it was. I've changed my mind. You know, we're kind of stuck in what I've called hell. It's hell because there's been trial and error, but no success. Now, in this part of the process of change, we have very common themes: negative emotions, limiting beliefs, lack of coping skills, and this fight, flight, or freeze response. So it is a very unpleasant place to be. Eventually, the reason I called it hell isn't because I thought of it myself. I was remarking actually one day about something Winston Churchill said. Keith, do you know what I'm going to say about Winston Churchill said about when you're going through hell? What did Churchill say? Does anybody know before I give it away?
I don't recall.
So Winston Churchill, did you know?
I don't recall.
Okay, it's obscure. When Winston Churchill said, when you're going through hell, keep going, which I found to be a very curious thing, because you would think that the advice would be, when you're going through hell, you should run away and turn around and get out as fast as you can. But Churchill said you should keep going. And then he also has another famous quote: never, ever, ever, ever
Give up.
Give up. Never. Now, this is a man who got the entire British army that was stranded in France back to Britain when they said it couldn't be done. I believe Churchill knew something about this phase, because if, as long as you keep going, you eventually will break through to the new way of being. New skills, positive emotions, obviously, because you've broken through. Creativity abounds, coherence, and then, so you've got it, and then you master it, so you practice it. So think of the breakthrough as getting it right once, and think of mastery as getting it right for good, or as I like to say, practice. Don't just practice so you get it right once, practice so you can't get it wrong, because then it becomes the dominant habit and it becomes the new way of being, right? So now you're at this new level. Now, this is the process of change, no matter what, whether you want to change or not. And what you want to notice is right now the world's got slammed. See, the desire for change up there at point B was provided by a crisis. People didn't want to change per se. The crisis has forced them to want to change. Now, that's not always great because they don't have the coping mechanisms. And so a lot of people get stuck in this place. And maybe you're feeling that yourself. So I want to bookend this conversation with this now, and then we're going to come back to it at the end and explain to you what you can do to help manage the reality of change.
Hey, Gina.
So,
one discussion we had the other day, I just want to call out for CEOs and leaders listening in. One of the premises here, which we're discovering is truth with a lowercase t, is this: as you lead your companies or your organizations, if you're leading with the same process in the same way in changing circumstances, you're going to get diminishing returns in productivity. And
yes.
Gina, I think you're going to go into that in a little more detail. So the premise is, as things change, we adapt. And that's
yes.
very important to be a peak performance leader. Okay.
In fact, Keith, I'm so glad you said the word adapt, because I have a little quiz for everyone right now. And you just made me think of it, so we're going to do it. So as leaders, right now into the chat box, what I'd like you to do is, if you could only pick one quality that you could develop for the rest of your career, so you had to lock it in right now, what would be the quality you would lock in right now if you could only develop one as a leader for the rest of your career? Go ahead and type that into the chat. What are some qualities? Oh, fantastic. Keith, you're cheating. Anybody else? Right? So people always say collaboration, trust, communication, and those are admirable qualities. But I want to tell you that the law of requisite variety states that the person or system with the most flexibility of behavior will maintain control of the system, not control of individuals, but they will be able to control and direct an outcome. So adaptability becomes the most important thing for a leader to be able to do, to be able to adapt to the environment versus react, which is very different. Okay, so let's talk then about that difference. A lot of people react to the environment, but the truth is that the environment is sort of the end of a cycle, if you will, right? The cycle kind of goes like this. There's your state that produces your behavior, which produces your results. Now let's go to the state, because that looks like a person, right? People always say to me, Gina, isn't results created, aren't they created by behavior? And they are. You can see that behavior precedes results. But that's not the beginning of the equation. The beginning of the equation is your state, the state that you are in. Now I want to explain what the state is in a minute, because there are three very important components to it. But what you want to understand is that it starts in the state, then that state dictates your choices for behavior, and then that behavior produces your results. So yes, your behavior does produce your results, but it's not where it starts. So let's go inside and look at what your state is. So, and I believe, Keith, that you use a 3-point approach too, don't you? And I
Yes.
think they're very similar. Tell me again what it is. It's 3D approach. Is that what it's called?
Well, yeah. So in reference to our upcoming leadership summit, the 3-dimensional leader leads with their head, thinking intellect, their heart, their emotions, connection with people, and their hands, putting things biased toward action.
So when you shared that with me, I was like, no, because it's going to parallel so nicely into my teaching. There are 3 components to your state. One is your focus. The second is your emotions, and the third is your physiology. Now let's just think about that. Focus is mental, emotions are emotional, physiology is your hands. So it's very similar to your approach, which is probably why we get along. Now, the first and most important aspect of your state is your focus, and your focus must be on what you want. Now I know this seems trivial, but in a minute I'm going to explain how many people pretend to be focusing on what they want because they use positive sounding words. And this is important. You should use positive sounding words in the sense that you should say it the way you want it, but don't cover it up. Don't say positive sounding words while really what you're focused on is disaster, because we get what we focus on, and I'll explain that in a minute. Then you have to have an emotional state, but it should be a positive emotional state. Now also, people, they struggle with this because they're like, obviously if I pick a positive emotion, if I wanted, if I could, I'm going to explain that the emotions aren't what we think they are, and they're actually very powerful, but not in the way that we're accustomed to viewing them. So I have a program called Real Emotional Intelligence, which is very different. I probably should have mentioned up front, I'm a bit of a contrarian. So I kind of take commonly accepted ideas and turn them on their head and examine them. It's just, I guess it's just the engineer in me. So emotions are one thing I'm going to turn upside down for you. And then finally, you have to have a physiology of power. Now, a physiology of power means, your body's got to be working to its best possible capacity. And I'm not talking about muscles, although physical fitness is part of a physiology of power. I'm talking about the connection of the nervous system, quite frankly, and I'm talking specifically about the components of your physiology that when they work together, we are unstoppable, and when they don't, we are quite stoppable. So I want to talk about physiology of power. Now, once you have those 3 components, focus on what you want, choose positive emotions, have a physiology of power, then you take action. So those 3 things dictate your choices in the behavior you're going to take. So now I'd like to cover each one of them just briefly. Obviously, I could talk about this for days, just so we're clear. But this is a synopsis to get you to consider that before you go out to lead your people, you have to get control of your response. Because otherwise, you're just reacting to an environment that you have no control over. Right? So, in a situation like this, we are acutely reminded that we have 0 control over the circumstances, right? 0. And actually, what I want to show you in the next slide is the power of your focus. If you focus on what you don't want, i.e. the problems with the crisis, the responses with the crisis, what your government is doing, what your politicians are doing, what your influencers are doing, if you focus on any of that in a resistance kind of way, it's a form of focus, and it will actually cost you performance. So let's talk about focus, because this is by far the most important leg of your state. Now, here's the model I like to use. So this particular model was actually collected in 1954. So a lot of the stuff, if I put a number on the screen, it's got a source. So these numbers were collected in 1954. And in 1954, we'll call them the grandfathers of the computer, right? Miller, Galantner, et cetera, Pribham. They were trying to model the human mind to see if we could make a computer. What they measured was that outside of your body, and I like to call it a meat suit. It's just a cute little name I have for our body. So outside of your meat suit is 2 million bits per second of information in 1954. Just a quick pause. Keith, do you think that's gone up or down since 1954?
I think that's orders of magnitude larger.
Yeah, And before this crisis, on a stage, I used to say, maybe it's 2 billion. And now we're in a crisis. I'm going to argue it goes up maybe another order of magnitude. So there's all this, but let's use 1954 numbers because that's what's impactful. 2 million bits of information coming at you via your 5 senses. And in order to determine what operating state and the programs you're going to use to operate, your brain can only use 126 bits a second. Out of 2 million, out of 2 billion, out of 2 trillion. But out of 2 million, 126 bits a second is 0.006%. It's nothing. It's nothing. The brain cannot use everything that's available to it. Now, lately, I've been using an analogy of a budget. Your budget for what you can focus on is 126 bits a second. Now, here's the thing. If you're not in charge of your focus, someone else is. And so, and I don't mean that in a evil way. If you're not doing it proactively, it's being stolen by distraction and media and bad news and whatever, the shiniest object in the room. So how then do we sort through 2 million bits of information? Well, we have built into our physiology a focusometer. That's the best way to describe it. Keith, and everybody watching, I can't see you though, I can only see Keith. Go feel the back of your head, right where the skull kind of, there's like a hole there. Be where you plug into the matrix if you were in that movie, right? That's where the reticular activating system is. It's part of the old part of the brain. And the reticular activating system's job is to look for what you're looking for because it's got to sort 126 out of 2 million in every second. It actually works faster than that, but that's the order of magnitude we can cope with. So here's how it works. It's binary. So when something is wrong, if you constantly look for what's wrong, your reticular activating system goes, okay, let's build a bucket over here called everything that's wrong, and we'll build a bucket over here called everything else. So here's what's wrong, here's what's not. There it is. So what's wrong? Yep, yep, in the bucket. Nope, 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 yep, yep, yep. And so all you end up with is everything that's wrong. Proof that things are wrong and more proof that things are wrong. Now, it works no matter how you use the reticular activating system. So simply flipping it to say, for example, and by the way, I'm not one of those motivational speakers that says pretend nothing's wrong. That is absolutely an error. And I did the funniest bit on my Facebook Live with a chair. It's too long for this, but if you want to watch it, just go watch it on Facebook. So basically, you say, okay, there's a problem. So we have problem X, and then you direct your reticular activating system to what is the solution. What's the solution? And it sets up 2 buckets. One is called solution, and the other one is called not the solution. So it goes, it's going through, it goes solution, not solution, not solution, solution, not solution. It doesn't differentiate. Now, by definition, Keith, if I were to ask you, is a problem considered to be solution or not solution?
Problem would be not solution.
So your problem disappears as you search for solutions. It's a function of the reticular activating system. Now I have a quick exercise. Do we have time for like a 20-second exercise?
We do.
Okay, great. So in the room that you're in right now, everybody do this with 100% level 10 effort. Keith, you got to do this for everybody. What I want you to do is I want you to map with your eyes, take in the room that you're in. Where is everything that's red in the room? And in a second, I'm going to ask you to close your eyes, and I'm going to ask you to, with accuracy, describe to me, that red thing is up and to my left and down and to my right and so on. So 10 more seconds to just really map where red is. Okay, great. Now, Keith, close your eyes and tell me where the green is.
I only know from memory the Pakistani flag right back there.
Because you can't. Because when you're looking for red, your reticular activating system sets up 2 buckets. Red, not red. And that's it. So it doesn't set up yellow, blue, pink, green, orange, and sorts no, it takes in the scene and it looks for red, looks for red, looks for red. That's it, that's it, that's it, that's it. So this is the power of your focus. Now, once that comes into you, right, it determines what you are going to be able to do. So if you don't set your reticular activating system to look for what you are looking for, then it's anyone's guess what you're focused on. Now, then you do your behavior. But that behavior is constricted by the 126 bits you brought in the first place. So if all you brought in were problems, your behavior is based on all of those problems. It can't be based on problem solving because you brought in problems. So I've been using this analogy of a budget, and it's been extremely impactful, right? So you have to focus on what you want. So what about positive words? What about positive thinking? Because we can fool ourselves, can't we? Like, right? I mean, you can say, if we could interact with the audience, people always say to me at this point, obviously I focus on what I want, but do you? Now, luckily, and this is where I'm going to turn emotions on their head for you, we have built in a guidance system, which will tell us without question whether we are internally focused on what we want or what we don't want. And it is the emotional guidance system. The emotional guidance system is this concept that your emotions are simply a communication from the unconscious part of your mind as to what you are actually focused on. So it goes something like this. Let's say you're focused on, I'm going to find a solution to this problem. Let's say those are the great positive words that come out of your mouth. But internally, you're set up to react to the belief that you're not smart enough to figure this out. But let's say that's just a limiting belief that you carry around with you that constantly plays out. The minute you activate the problem solution dynamic, it's going to go to that belief and you're going to focus on it. Unconsciously, not consciously, because with your words, you're saying the things leaders should say. But in your mind, you're running a program that is actually what you don't want. For example, instead of moving towards solution, you're moving away from problem. It's the same kind of thing, but the focus is totally different. So instead of focusing on what you want, which is the solution, you're focusing on avoiding what you don't want, which is ultimately focusing on what you don't want. And no matter what you are focused on is what you will bring into the reality that you live in. So the emotions are a way to keep you honest. The emotional guidance system will never lie to you, and it's super simple to understand. If the words you say are what you want, and the programs underneath that are running in order to get that are what you want, then you will feel what we call positive emotions, because there is an alignment. If you are saying what you want and the program underneath is the opposite, or it's focused on what you don't want, the resulting emotion will be a negative emotion, one we would classify as negative. It's binary. Positive emotions mean alignment, negative emotions mean disalignment. There's no longer meaning to the emotion itself. And so the emotional guidance system is this. If you notice that anytime along the way, you're putting yourself together to create behavior, you say, okay, I'm looking for the solution, and then you feel a negative emotion, you have to stop what you're doing immediately and notice that emotion, because any step you take in that negative emotional state will bring you towards what you don't want. Then you have to alter it. Now, I'd love to teach a quick altering technique as a group if we have time. It's a quick one. In fact, I'll teach you the quickest one I know. The quickest one I know is with respect to frustration. This is just a little catchy little tool, because people are frustrated from time to time, and it renders us creativeless. It renders us unable to come up with a solution. It paralyzes us a bit, being frustrated with someone, not getting somewhere. So Keith, I want you to demonstrate for everybody. So what frustrates you mildly? What's something that just, kind of pushes your frustration button? It's like slow this or whatever that. What's something?
Let's see. So someone who's not all in as a team member.
Great. So you're having a meeting and you kind of get this feeling they're not all in. Maybe they're like looking at their phone or something, right? So here's what you do in the exact moment you notice it, because you have to stop what you're doing. Notice that's frustration. Now here's the altering. Okay. Look up at the ceiling. Look up. Smile. Big smile. Okay. Frustration disappears. Come back down. Continue. Now in a meeting, you can make it look like you're stretching, right? And taking a breath. But what you're doing is you're choosing to alter your focus. Even though it feels like you're altering the emotion, you're actually altering the focus, which was on this guy's not all in, to back to whatever the purpose of your meeting was. And the emotion will disappear because you did that. But it's not the emotion you've changed, it's the focus you've changed, and then you proceed. So, yeah.
And Gina, in this case, there actually was, you were changing your physiology a bit too with the physical movement, right? And that was the intentional decision, which then initiated that process. Is that correct?
Well, so what you're getting at, actually, because I can see one teacher to another, the underlying mechanism for what I just taught you comes from neuro-linguistic programming, which understands the connection of our body and our mind, right? So it's just a way of connecting those two things. But what's actually really interesting, and you said it, was that you're choosing to do it. See, I first of all, I don't hold the belief that the negative emotion is a bad thing, because I live in the paradigm of the emotional guidance system. So I see emotions as the highest, one of the most fast, high services to my goals. So therefore, I don't hold a judgment that you should do anything with it. But then if it's not working for you, because frustration or any other emotion we would classify as negative tends to have this effect of paralyzing us or fight, flight, or freeze. So in that case, then it's your choice. And if it's not working for you, then you have to choose to do something different. And if you don't know what else to do, then that little technique helps you get up and over that hump. Ultimately, what you're doing is changing your focus. But I call it snap. And the reason I call it snap is we use in the English language, snap out of it, right? Like I'll say, come on, Keith, snap out of it, right? Snap out of it. So snap, stop what you're doing, notice the emotion, alter it, and then proceed. Now, alter is highlighted in red. Here's why. Because every technique on the planet that can alter an emotional state will work here. Sure, I teach tons, but other people have other techniques, and they all work here. It's whatever you think will work, will work. But a really important thing, I want to go back to what you said, Keith, about choosing. How many of you, by show of hands, have tried to change someone that doesn't want to change? How many of you? Show of hands. Yeah. Hey, Julie, how's that going? Or Jean-Guy or Sri? Yeah, not so good, right? Just type into the chat box. How does it go when you try to change someone that doesn't want to change? All right. So when someone doesn't want to change, there is nothing you can do to change them. But here's what's fascinating. When someone wants to change, there's nothing you can do to stop them. And so this is very important for peak performance states. They must be chosen. Okay. I can't tell you to do this. I'm not the emotional guidance police. I'm not the focus police. I'm not attached. Whenever something's not working for someone, I can observe with my sensory acuity that it might not be working for them. I always ask one question: how's that working for you? Because if the person can come to awareness that it's not working, they have a choice. So focus on what you want, because the reticular activating system has a budget, and you will always get what you focus on. Number two, just in case you lose consciousness of what your focus is on, your emotions will tell you. So you must choose the positive emotion, which means you have to snap out of it. Does anybody remember what the third leg of the peak performance state was? Poor Keith, you have to answer all my questions. You guys can help Keith out by typing in the chat. Does anybody remember the third leg of the peak performance? Physiology, correct. Physiology of power. Now, let's have a quick conversation about physiology, because you asked me a question about physiology in the last one. This is really important. And in fact, Keith, I'm guessing you probably know a lot of things about physiology and what makes for strong physiology and what doesn't. But in your experience, if people can't quite get the physiology performance that they want, like, let me rephrase this question a different way. What causes the most illness, the highest employee absenteeism, and a lack of performance universally? What do people blame? What's the like cost associated with? If I look up statistics for employee productivity, I always find this S word showing up all over the place. What do people say? They say I have too much what? It's too what?
Too much to do, or?
Too much to do. And what is that? What do we call that? It's a word. It starts with S. Oh yeah, Michael nailed it. There you go. You're getting help from the panelists. Stress. Good. Thank you. Stress. We blame it all on stress, right? If I look up a statistic for absenteeism, I see stress is the culprit, right? If I look up a statistic on engagement, I see stress is the culprit. Stress is always the culprit. Why, why is your health gone downhill? Oh, I have too much stress, right? That's how we say it. Mm-hmm. Now, here's the thing. We say the words, I have stress. Now, one of the components of neuro-linguistic programming is the letter L for linguistics. Mm-hmm. So I'm a big, and we've talked about this, words are extremely powerful. So in the sentence, I have stress, stress is the noun, have is the verb, right? Great, I have stress. So if I were to bring a green wheelbarrow up to the door, for anybody watching, how many of you have more stress than you want? Give me a hand. Janice just got her hand up the whole time. So Janice, if I were to bring you a wheelbarrow, could you put your stress in my wheelbarrow? Think about it. Could you? Keith, could you put your stress in my wheelbarrow?
No.
You can't. A noun is a person, place, or thing. So an iPhone is a thing. We could put an iPhone, right, in a wheelbarrow. And yet we use it linguistically. I have stress. Mm-hmm. But here's a curious thing. It's not a noun, right? Stress is the use of I have stress in our English language setup. We've sort of frozen it in time. Stress is actually a process word, mm-hmm. frozen in time to something we call a nominalization. So we can use it grammatically to talk to one another and communicate, but it's actually not a noun. And when we react to it as if it were a noun, it's something that we have, or even worse, something that someone gives to us, and it's like on us, versus something that we do. Mm-hmm. Now, stress is something that we do. The stress response is real. Please don't misunderstand me. Once the stress response is activated, it wreaks havoc in the body. Absolutely. And it's hardwired. It was designed for saber-toothed tiger attacks, right? Mm-hmm. But we've made everything a saber-toothed tiger attack. And so what's happening is we're constantly reacting fight, flight, or freeze when it's not appropriate or called for. So we've got this saber-toothed tiger attack. And once it's in our mind, as we allow it to run, we enable it, or we empower it. And then it wreaks havoc inside our physiology. And it impedes our ability to think, to make problems go away, to solve, to create, to imagine, to extract, it impedes all of that. Like when you're running from a saber-toothed tiger, all blood goes to your legs and that's it. Like it's gone, right? You don't digest, you don't eliminate, you don't do anything, right? And so that's not productive when you're trying to sit there and solve a problem or make a plan for 3 weeks from now. It's just not effective. So the first thing you have to realize is stress is something you do. Now the initial reaction is not, that's hardwired. Just if you find yourself in a state of stress, don't beat yourself up, because people spend a lot of time trying to eliminate that. That's just what happens. But the minute you become aware of it, ask yourself this question: how's that working for you? And if it's not working for you, I'm going to invite you to learn a quick technique that I teach everyone to halt any stress response. Can we do it together? Do you think, Keith, will you do it with me?
Let's do it.
Okay, I'm going to stop share so that we can just be us on the screen. It's going to take us about 30 seconds. Now, when I travel around the world, I always ask this grandmother question. I say, when you were like a little kid and you were fighting with your brother, your cousin, you were playing at a family event, maybe it was like a church picnic or something, and you got to a fight over a ball, and grandmothers separate two kids, right? You can just see the grandmother goes walking over. She separates. She goes, okay, everybody stop and take a deep
breath
and count to
100.
Well, my grandmother said, and
We
count to
got in
10.
a lot of trouble. We got in a lot of
Yeah,
trouble.
that, you are a troublemaker. So my grandmother always said count to 10. And so I got to thinking, how many counts of 10 are there in a minute? 6.
Mhm.
And then if you read any book on breathing whatsoever, it will tell you that 6 breaths a minute is a magical breath number. So if you breathe deeper than normal, and I'm going to just say slower than normal, but 6 breaths per minute being like the most researched number, you will halt a stress response. Right? Some people say it takes a minute. I've got some research from the Institute of Heart Math that suggests it takes about 100 seconds. That's about a minute and a half. But why don't we practice as a group? Just taking, we'll do a minute because that's 6 breaths. We'll do 6 breaths in 1 minute. We'll just practice. Now, all I want you to do is practice breathing slower than normal and deeper, right? So let me just stand up, right? So we breathe in our chest, right? We breathe like that. And what I want you to do is breathe so that your belly expands. So breathe, and your belly would expand like a baby. Okay, so everybody blow out all your air. I'm going to start a little timer here on my phone. I'm going to start a timer so that we breathe at 6 breaths per minute as a group. Ready, set, breathe in. Now breathe out. On the next breath in right now, I'd like to invite you to imagine breathing through your heart and then breathe out. Now, as you breathe in through your heart, just breathe in whatever is in your environment or in your circumstances. And as you breathe out, imagine breathing it away. Imagine breathing it away. Now breathe in again. And as you breathe out, just imagine the problems or the circumstances or whatever it is coming out. Now breathe in again. Now imagine just cleaning that out and being grateful for what you have. Breathe in one more time, and then breathe out a big sigh of gratitude. Good. That was 1 minute. How was that, Keith?
That was great. That's fantastic.
Yeah, that will halt any stress response. And if you want to use heart math research, then that's fine. That's 100 seconds, no big deal, right? So that's 1 minute. Now that will halt a stress response. Mm-hmm. What's powerful is, should you choose to do that for 15 minutes in a row, right, on purpose, you actually change something in your body. You change states. Now, mm-hmm. I'm borrowing heart math's vocabulary here, because mm-hmm. this, you need to become aware of the states of coherence versus the states of incoherence. And these are measurable, by the way. I practice every day using a biofeedback device so that I know that I'm actually putting myself in a state of coherence versus a state of incoherence. Because it's not just enough to fool yourself into thinking you're doing it, right? Each step along the way, you want to use the feedback to adjust your state. So I said earlier, you got to focus on what you want. Now, the way you be certain that you focused on what you want is you'll have a positive emotion. So now we want a physiology of power. And I'd like to introduce you to the concept of coherence. Coherence is a physiological state that can be measured, and up until very recently measured by an ECG and an EEG. But because technology has gotten so great, we can now use our smartphones and tablets to measure this stuff as long as we have the right sensors. A state of coherence is physiologically superior. It's sort of like, you're like a race car driver changing gears at the exact right time. It's getting the body, Mihei Csikszentmihalyi wrote a book called Flow. Have you ever read Flow, Keith, or heard of Flow?
I've heard of it. I haven't read it.
So the state of flow is very similar to the state of coherence. You're in the zone. Have you ever heard the phrase in the zone, where it's just like everything is timeless? That's coherence. Mm-hmm. And most of us don't operate in coherence, but you can put yourself in coherence on purpose. And it's 15 minutes of that breath technique that I just taught you, layering in one more component, which is activating a feeling of gratitude while you are doing the breathing. Mm-hmm. And after 15 minutes of this practice, and if you were to do this for 3 months, your actual base coherence scores will go up. You will be more resilient. You will be have more capacity. You will have more problem-solving abilities. You'll have more creativity. You'll be able to get yourself into a peak performing state faster. Now, Keith, you know I love heart math, and we talked about this because we kind of use this analogy at the beginning to talk about peacetime versus wartime. People often confuse breathing techniques with relaxation techniques. I'm not suggesting that you relax in a crisis. That's inappropriate, because relaxing is not what we need. What we need is clarity of thinking. What we need is a coherent state. And why I like heart math's techniques is they were originally developed and applied to soldiers in combat, police officers in high stress, domestic violence situations, things where things could go wrong very quickly. And what they needed were these frontline people to be able to maintain problem-solving faculties, creative thinking faculties, keep calm, cool, and collected. And so I think that that's fascinating, because most people today working in an office or doing the business that they're doing, they're not in an actual war. So if it works for a combat soldier and a police officer, it's probably going to work for the business leader to do the same types of practice. And the practice is exactly what I just taught you. Every day for about 15 minutes, you practice this. And then whenever you find yourself triggered, you practice it as you are, and truly, it could just be, like you said to me before this call, should we take a breath? Just for you guys on the call, I had a bit of a computer fail right before this started, right? But it's the ability to remain coherent and resilient that allows me to solve problems, right? And so, Keith, let's talk a little bit about this metaphor with peacetime and wartime, because it was so fascinating to me that this practice came out of that, and yet you have direct experience with that.
Yeah, in fact, for the listening audience, this is what cued our time here today. I was sharing with Gina that I had been trained as a naval officer in the 80s, served aboard USS Enterprise, and what they taught us is they would put under various conditions, and then we would learn the appropriate responses and thinking. And Gina, what I'm learning even today as you share this, part of our success in being able to act under crisis was the repetition of practice. Practice makes permanence, the response. But we didn't have at that time is the science and the breathing and the gratitude science that puts you in the state. So I served with many men and a few women that would be under tremendous pressure, but under tremendous pressure, they were calm, cool, collected, could think, and make the right decisions to put a wartime vessel in the best position of safety and success. And so everyone, that was important.
And there they are under fire. State behavior results. Now that gratitude science is huge, and we obviously don't have time to get into it today, but when you are in that state, you are receptive to those intuitive ideas, right? So now I want to wrap this up and help these leaders understand how they can support the people that work for them, because I want you to understand what happens to your people during a crisis, right? So let's go to this slide here. So this is the process of change. Remember the process of change from the beginning? Okay, here's what happens under intense pressure. So when you are changing, you have your comfort zone with dominant patterns, and then there's a challenge. During a challenge, you either break through to the next level, right, which is what you want to do, but what's actually happening when the challenge exceeds coping ability, so when the patterns for the next level are not dominant yet, they're developing, maybe they're a leader, but they're not dominant yet, they will retreat to their last comfort zone. So this is important for you as a leader, because your people, right now, I'm sure you have leaders who work for you, absolutely. And you would hope, oh yeah, Bob's an up and coming leader. I've been working with him and grooming with him. And so he's gonna step up in this crisis. And now you're shocked why Bob's not stepping up. Bob's not stepping up because he didn't make dominant yet the patterns that you were teaching and grooming in him. And so you can't expect people to be able to lead. You actually have to take charge now, and you have to lead because you have the dominant patterns and they do not, right? So back to our metaphor, right, Keith? What happens in wartime versus peacetime?
Yes, and so let me start with the business world. Moving from a collaborative leadership model, crisis comes into a more directive leadership model where you're giving people specific direction so you can move more quickly. And when people are receiving more direction in crisis, they act, they feel more in control, and they're gaining confidence, and your speed of execution is going to increase. And that was part of our discussion the other day, that speed of execution.
So you have to guard your focus because you're in charge, and you have to be at 126 bits a second. You can't be letting anything in that does not serve your outcome. But then you have to turn around and use your understanding of peak performance states without teaching this to all of your employees, although you could. You have to lead their focus by getting their attention away from what is the problem and on to you. So as long as you withdraw focus from what you don't want and put it on what you want, you're golden. You are going to be in a peak performing state. But you have to lead their focus, which means you're going to need to communicate more quickly, more frequently. You're going to need to tell them what to do. You're going to need to say what to focus on. And you're going to need to put parameters in place that ensure that. And then and only then will they feel secure, because they will now feel like someone's driving the ship.
And Gina, I'll give an example of that. I was just on with the CEO this morning from a large national home builder that I coach in Phoenix. And they've gone from doing quarterly planning sessions and having 5 priorities as a collaborative process to now every 30 days, they set 3 priorities, and the CEO is exerting more guidance and direction. So they're increasing their rhythm, their focus, they're saying no to more things, and it's focusing on fewer things. It's making a big difference.
It has to. So you have to, so that's it. You have to, let's just recap and then we'll turn it back to you to sort of drive it. You have to focus on what you want. You have to choose positive emotions and snap out of it, because the emotional guidance system will tell you what's happening. You have to have that physiology of power. And if you feel like your physiology is faltering, that breathing technique will always bring you back to power. And then you take action. And then as the leader during a crisis, you're going to need to recognize that it's not the same leadership style and structure that will support you during a crisis. It's just not appropriate to expect people who have not yet created dominant patterns of leadership to have to put them into practice. That doesn't mean they can't. And certainly if they're capable, they will step up. But don't be surprised, because what we're seeing is a massive productivity drop. Massive, because people are having to deal with crisis at work, homeschooling, crisis at home. They've got to cut their own hair. They got to figure out how to get groceries. They got to take care of older parents. It's too many bits of information are coming in at once. And so they're losing focus. So you have to lead their focus, and you have to lead with more authority than you might be comfortable with or used to, but it is absolutely required. So I can take questions. We can do whatever we want, but this is the basic gist of peak performance.
Okay, excellent, Gina. Let me ask some questions, and we'll take a look at chat and Q&A here. So individuals, leaders listening in, where can they go for more resource? Tell us a little bit about where to go for resource.
Oh, you know what? I had a resource screen that I wanted to share, and I didn't, because I wanted to focus on content. So right back here, right here, I wrote a book called Think or Sink. And the resources, so this book was written during the last crisis. It's literally what to do in a crisis. Think or sink, get it? Thoughts, focus, emotions, physiology, or sink. And I've made it available to everyone. So at greatnessu.com/virtual, there are free copies of Think or Sink plus a million other resources. They're all free. Nothing costs money right now. So everything's free, and you can give that to your employees. You can take it for yourself, share it with your clients, share it worldwide. It's just there to help people.
Okay, great. And then for listeners, Gina is going to be back with us at our client summit coming up June 18th and 19th. We're going to have a learning summit by 2 thought leaders each day. We're going to go deep, and we're going to add collaboration with peers to that. And so, Gina, we're looking forward to having you join us in June 18th and 19th time frame. And then let's see if we have some Q&A here.
And while you're looking that up, Keith, I'll maybe place a little, cookie in the June 18th thing. I'm going to expand a lot on a lot of this because obviously time-wise, we're constrained by how short this is, and the other one is a much longer. I'm going to teach a specific technique for eliminating worry and anxiety, which is really critical, but it takes a little bit more time and understanding. And also, I'm going to help frame practical things that you can do day in and day out so that you're constantly putting yourself back in that peak performance state. So how to just keep bouncing like a pinball back into peak performing state. So that's a little bit of what's to come in June.
Okay, great. And so as we bring things to a close then, my takeaways a fellow leader to those listening in. Number one, as a leader, put yourself in a peak performance state. It starts at home, and then adjust your leadership to see where your people are relative to the level of crisis. What Gina said is so true. Productivity will come down rapidly if we don't lead and manage appropriately with tools and science and techniques as just shared. And so everyone you see on our screen, this is the upcoming summit in June 18th or 19th. And with that, Gina, thank you so much.
I have a question. I want to close the metaphor that you opened at the beginning.
Okay.
When you were in the Navy, was it the same kind of leadership when it was peacetime versus wartime?
So it changed depending where we were in the world and what was going on around us. It was quite different.
Right. So you have to respond to the environment. And in a war, people often would retreat to their ranks, would they not? And all of a sudden, you would go back to what your rank was versus what you were being groomed to do. And you would just do the things that you needed to do. So it's a very, very strong analogy, right? Am I right?
Yeah, that's right. When crisis hits, when the battle starts, people retreat to their rank, okay? And what we want to do is we want to train them to be able to step up.
Exactly. So, I mean, I love that analogy, because right now we have to embody our inner warrior. We have to, with the strength of a warrior, we have to keep ourselves as leaders in peak performing states. And the stakes are high, and the challenge is high because the stimuli outside of us is massive. That's not to say it's not. I mean, there's opportunity everywhere. In the June session, I'm going to show you how to discern intuition versus fear. They sound exactly the same, but the intuitive signal is where the opportunity is, right? That's where there's a key that you could use to unlock some amazing thing that will have you actually thrive in a crisis.
And Gina, you made an excellent point. I'll just highlight and then we'll end. Our design criteria for the June client summit, we only are having 2 thought leaders a day, you being one on the 18th, so that we can take what you teach us, we can go into breakout peer groups and discuss it. What we didn't want to do is just give more information to our leaders present, but allow them to process it with other leaders in breakout rooms. So,
right.
Okay. Gina, thank you so much for your service to our community of CEOs and leaders worldwide. Everyone, thank you for listening. And
thanks for having me.
Okay, take care.
Thank you,
everyone.